Hey, everybody, welcome. Welcome. Just letting you folks roll in from the waiting room. But hi, everybody. It's good to see you, or your names at least. It's been yeah, at least a couple of months since we've all met, maybe longer if you usually come to the CPR group and not the Mass Pollinator Network meeting. So yeah, I'm really happy to see everybody. Yeah, so we have a lot to cover tonight. So I am going to go ahead and get started here. We do have one panelist who's having some technical difficulties. So we might, I might disappear for a second to help that person. But yeah, we'll go ahead and just get started. So my name is Rosemary Malfi. I am the Pollinator Network Coordinator at NOFA Mass. And you are at the very first joint monthly meeting of the Mass Pollinator Network and the Community Pesticide Reduction Network. I think most folks on the call probably know, about the other network, even if they don't participate in it. But if you're not familiar with that, I can drop a couple links in the chat so that you can check out each of those different networks. And I guess what I'll say is, going forward, I hope to do more of these because I think there's a lot of overlapping interests between the two networks. So yeah, you can expect more of these joint meetings, hopefully, in the future. Normally at a Mass Pollinator Network meeting, we open it with some small group introductions, an opportunity to kind of network. We are not going to do that tonight because we don't really have time, but I promise we're going to bring it back in October. And you'll get a chance to do that then. It's very fun to get to know people. All right. I think, yes, I introduced myself, and I guess Mireille, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the shift that you've made recently?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Mireille Bajani. I use she, her, they pronouns, and I am one of the co-executive directors of Slingshot, which is a relatively new organization that supports frontline communities in holding polluters accountable and building community power. And for those in the CPR network who've been around for a while and know me, you know that that has not been my affiliation in the past. I used to work for Community Action Works. And so I am still doing a lot of the same work that I was doing at Action Works, and also still working with a lot of the same people I was working with at Action Works. So a little bit of an organizational transition, but the same kind of work, and in terms of organizing support. And that's kind of the role that I play in the CPR network space, is when we have kind of workshop calls going over how to organize around pesticide reduction, how to prep for a town meeting, how to build a group, how to, do kind of the on the ground organizing stuff. So excited to have so many folks here today, and I'll pass it back to Rosemary for next steps. And also, if anyone has further questions about this organizational transition and Slingshot, happy to chat. So feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Mireille. Great. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. The one thing I wanted to do was that I forgot to mention earlier on is that I wanted to just let folks know that we do have a seminar event next week with Larry Cochran, who's a master gardener in Western Massachusetts. This is an online event that's being held in partnership with the Berkshire Botanical Garden. I'm going to drop a link for registration in the chat. Usually we try to make all of our seminars totally free of charge and open to everyone. In this one case, we are charging a small fee for registration. It's $10 for members and $12 for non-members of Berkshire Botanical Garden. And all of those proceeds will benefit the Massachusetts Pollinator Network. So it's a little bit of a fundraising event. So I encourage folks to come out and learn about leaving the leaves and how to protect overwintering pollinators with us next week on Wednesday. All right, with that, I am going to turn our attention to the topic for this evening. We have invited 5 panelists to share their experiences tonight. And the goal in doing that is to sort of get a sense for how we can leverage some of these positions in local government to advance, the agenda of reducing pesticides or otherwise supporting pollinators in our local communities. So I want to thank all of the folks here who came here tonight. I really appreciate it. And I'm actually going to let you introduce yourselves, because my first question to each of you is describing your position, either the one that you hold or the one that you've held in the past, and kind of what the purview of that position is. So you can just give yourself kind of a little introduction and give us a taste of the position that you occupy or that you've occupied previously. So I'm going to start with Vivian Orlowski, who's the chair of Great Barrington's Agricultural Commission. And then I'll go to Anne.
There, now I'm unmuted. Okay. I am currently the chair of the Great Barrington Agricultural Commission, and I've served in that role since 2015. From 2010 to 2015, I was a member of the Agricultural Commission, and other town commissions and boards that I've served on were the Master Plan Commission from 2010 to 2013. That was a self-limiting group that ended when the Master Plan was issued in 2013 with a section on agriculture, and I represented the Agricultural Commission on that body. And also, more recently, I served on the Great Barrington Economic Development Committee. That was from 2019 to 2020. The committee disbanded with the onset of COVID. We kind of got discouraged, and our chairs didn't see how we could go ahead at that point. So that was just a one-year experience. But here again, I was trying to show the importance of food and agriculture in our local economy, which often gets overlooked. The purview of the Agricultural Commission is, and I'll read this, the Agricultural Commission serves as facilitators for encouraging the pursuit of agriculture in Great Barrington and promotes agricultural-based economic opportunities in town. We are an advisory. We serve in an advisory capacity. We are volunteers appointed by the select board. We're not elected. We advise the select board, the planning board, the Board of Health, the Conservation Commission, library director. We reach out to other parts of government to bring up things that are relevant, or sometimes respond to things that they ask us. For example, when the planning board asked us about advice on solar siting rules for siting solar collectors on farms.
Excellent. Thank you, Vivian. Next, we have Anne O'Connor.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Anne O'Connor. I am a former member of the Select Board in Williamstown, Massachusetts. That's an elected position. I served 2 terms for 6 years, from 2013 to 2021. While I was on the Select Board, I served on a temporary, or a Parks and Recreation Committee that had an assigned job and then sunsetted after that job. The Affordable Housing Trust and our Cool Committee, which is carbon dioxide lowering. It's basically our green committee, but focused particularly on energy. Energy. And I'm also a founding member and current co-chair of our group Bee Friendly Williamstown. And we were getting organized even as I first came on to the Select Board. And I think the Select Board is the governing body of the town, but we have strong town manager government. So all the nuts and bolts of government are handled by our town manager, and the Select Board is maybe advisory, but we're also where people turn publicly when they want to, our meetings become the public forum for issues. Anyway, I'll stop there. I think I started answering the second question. Sorry, Rosemary.
No, you're good. Thank you, Anne. Let's go ahead and go to Raina McManus.
Oh, hi. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Raina McManus. I'm from Wellesley, and I'm a town meeting member in Wellesley. And for the last 8 years, until this past March, I served as a member of Wellesley's elected Natural Resources Commission, or the NRC. So a little history of how the NRC came to be. In the late 1970s, residents in town were dissatisfied with the way our open spaces were being cared for. Different departments like the DPW or the select board were in charge of different parcels of land, which made for uneven rules and management and led to lots of confusion. So in 1977, town meeting voted to consolidate open space management in an elected Natural Resources Commission bearing the statutory authority, I'll read this, and responsibility of park commissions, conservation commissions, which is our appointed Wetlands Protection Committee, tree wardens, town forest committees, and very relevant to this discussion, the forestry and pest control officers. So there are 5 elected commissioners who each hold a 3-year term, and there's a 4-person department composed of a director who reports to the chair of the commission. We don't have a town manager in Wellesley. We have a very decentralized form of government. There's also a wetlands administrator, an education outreach compliance officer, and a secretary. And the commissioners work with the public to create policies for land use and care. And the majority of the physical care is carried out by our DPW. So all told, the NRC has jurisdiction of about 545 acres of land and is the largest landowner in the town.
Wow. Cool. It's very cool. I did not know a lot of that. Thank you, Raina. Go ahead and pass it to Freddie and then Owen. Hi, Freddie.
Hi, everybody. Freddie Gillespie from Southborough, Massachusetts. I'm the current chair of the Southborough Open Space Preservation Commission. I've been a member for 20 years now, and I've carried out different other positions in town. Currently, I'm on this representing this Open Space Preservation Commission. I sit on the Stewardship Committee, and that is charged with managing our premier open space parcel owned by under the care and control of the Conservation Commission, Breakneck Hill Conservation Land, where we have done much of our positive habitat restoration work for pollinators and grassland birds specifically, but we also manage it for very non-compatible uses of, dog walkers and joggers and people, trails, and we manage each with great concern for meeting everyone's needs, but with our highest priority being habitat. And this had been in 2003 declared the worst oriental bittersweet infestation in Metro West. So we went from 40 acres of dead apple trees supporting rolling bittersweet to now we have meadows and grasslands. We manage the grasslands for declining species of grassland birds. 2015, we had been managing for pollinators, but we started collaborating with Dr. Robert G. Geer. We were his first research site in the state, and since then, great strides have been made to increase the at-risk species of pollinators present on the property. Part of this is due to the Open Space Preservation Commission's work. So our Open Space Preservation Commission has a very broad charge. Our charge is to facilitate the preservation of open space. So when there's an opportunity to preserve land, we work on that. Those opportunities are few and far between because of development pressure, high price of land. It becomes really hard to do it, but we have been involved in all of the recent land acquisitions. I would say I moved to the town thinking it was a different town. There's a lot of farms and This was in the late 90s, and shortly afterwards, they all were developed into, subdivisions. And that's how I got involved. It's like, what happened to this town? And since then, we found out that the town had only preserved one parcel since 1976 in 30 years. And we played a very active role in preserving Chestnut Hill Farm, putting a conservation restriction on it. And then another parcel, a golf course they wanted to develop, and then a smaller parcel. So we've, in the last 20 years, after 30 years of nothing, we've done two very significant parcels. But more work to be done. But because of that, I'm probably going on too long, we decided to focus on wildlife habitat everywhere. And following Doug Tallamy's talk about, nature in your backyard, we found that open space is any land open to the air and sky. So it didn't pertain just to preserve protected land, although that's what our bylaws require, but we took it broader. So that's how we, I don't want to say defend, but we justify that now we're not telling people what to do in their own yards or on commercial properties, but that's our role, because one of the main points of land protection is to preserve wildlife habitat and nature and clean water. So we've taken it broader, and we started a native pollinator, native plant initiative, and we continue to work on that. But we are advisory only. We have no official role, except for we did get town council to opine that we do have a role to comment on permitting, planning board and ZBA and Conservation Commission. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I was saying, that's the next question, is about exactly that. So thank you so much, Freddie. Owen?
Oh, hi, everybody. And thank you for having me, and really honored to be here with everybody else, all the other presenters and the other attendees. My name is Owen Zaret. I'm a city councilor from Easthampton, Massachusetts. I am in my third term now, so 5 years in. We have 2-year terms here. My main priority for getting involved with local government was to be able to contribute to green sustainable policies. I spent the majority of my last term working on elimination of single-use plastics, and we were able to pass a great ordinance here in Easthampton, essentially eliminating all our single-use plastics, and doing some work with plastic straws as well. Participate a lot in local cleanups, and I don't have any real official ecological background, but I have a significant interest in preserving pollinator populations. And so a lot of my focus, certainly during my time on city council, but in this term, has been on working towards developing native plant policies and working with the city to do so. So that's basically my goal here in this third term, is to work with the city to try to develop some sort of robust native plant policy, which would include both requirements around native plantings, as well as identifying planting sites and community education. So that's one of the reasons I'm here today, and one of the reasons I've been attending all these meetings. You're muted, Rosemary.
Thank you. Thank you, Owen, and thank you all for your responses. My next question is a little bit about a procedure, and that's just to perhaps folks in the room are more educated than me, but I could use an explanation on how decisions are made in some of these different positions. So I guess we're trying to get at, how can decisions be influenced from the position that you're in or the position that you used to occupy, and on your commission or in your local government position, how does something go from being a proposal to actually being implemented as policy? Because, the commissions and city council, they all kind of do different things. I realize it's kind of a big question, but yeah, I'll pass it off to Vivian first.
Well, I've organized my response on 3 levels: local, regional, and statewide, in terms of how we can get things done. And locally, we have the direct route in Great Barrington of town meeting. It's not representative town meeting. Every citizen can participate. And that's where in 2016, we were able to get wide support for the Pollinator Friendly Community Resolution, which then served to inspire many other communities. And we proposed it as the Agricultural Commission. We have to vote on it. And then the select board reviews proposed town meeting resolutions from government agencies. Citizens can also introduce their own resolutions by petition. But the point of this discussion tonight is to talk about how you can have influence from within the government. And that's the route we took for town meeting, and it was very successful. And then indirectly, the Agricultural Commission organized and presented reports to the Select Board and other boards. Most of you are familiar with our collaboration with the Conway School of Sustainable Landscape Planning and Design to produce the Great Barrington Pollinator Action Plan. We started organizing for that in 2017 and getting the funding together. And then in 2018, we worked with the Conway School graduate student team. And the report was published in spring of 2018. More recently, we also collaborated with the Conway School on a study called Growing Better Great Barrington about the food system, a regional food system in our area. We made sure that pollinators were given credit in that report, but it was not specifically a pollinator report. It was about the larger food and farming situation in our region, with Great Barrington as a kind of a center and a hub of that. And then we've also collaborated with our regional school district, both on their developing their vocational program to include relevant items, for example, horticulture in their program and the role of pollinators in that. And then we presented a very ambitious plan for a resilient living laboratory campus, and that was met with general interest, but we're still needing to follow up in order to get action on that. A lot of these things are people are receptive, I must say, and very pleased with, but it's really a matter of, follow-up emails or asking for a meeting or inviting them to a subsequent meeting of the Agricultural Commission, anything to get it back on their agenda, because pollinators are not on the top of their priority list, even though they may be very sympathetic if we present it in the right way, which we've been very fortunate in having. On the regional level, we collaborated on a major effort called Sustainable Berkshires Project that was conducted by the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. All our regions have the equivalent type of planning commission. I'm familiar with the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission out in the greater Boston area. And those are folks that we can, they have their own agenda. We're not going to create their agenda, but we can bring our own concerns to them, and usually they're quite receptive, and we'll include them in relevant projects like the Sustainable Berkshire Project about 5 years ago. And then we've also collaborated with a local college, Bard College at Simon's Rock. They have a Center for Food Studies. And in 2019, their conference after the report from the Conway School on the Great Barrington Pollinator Action Plan, they were inspired and they organized a Berkshire Pollinators Conference. So they were able to do something that was beyond the reach of our little volunteer commission with a minuscule budget. They were able to organize a big conference and bring in Thomas Seeley as the keynote speaker, and really did a great job on that. And that's available. I believe the video for that is available online. I'm not sure about that because they tried now since the pandemic. They've made the videos available online. That was pre-pandemic, so that might not be the case. And we've also worked with the Upper Housatonic Valley National Heritage Area, their Operation Pollination Program. And then finally, on the state level, there are state legislators that, thanks to Rosemary and thanks to Marty Dagoberto at NOFA, we get very good guidance on how we can influence legislation on the state level, something that is, beyond our ability otherwise, but by teaming up with others in the Mass Pollinator Network and NOFA, we can get things done. Also, in terms of the larger food issue, I was involved in something called the Massachusetts Food Policy Alliance about 11 years ago, and that basically was an advocacy group to create the Massachusetts Food Policy Council. And then this led to the creation of the Massachusetts local food action plan in 2015, and then the ongoing group that implements that, the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative, and also more recently to the Massachusetts Food System Caucus in the state legislature. So all of these are leverage points where we can reach out, and anyone can reach out as a citizen. You don't have to be a local official to do that. But if you are a local official, you tend to have more clout in terms of bringing your concerns about these issues and specifically about pollinators. Here again, they need to follow up and to mobilize others who are not directly involved with your committee to also get involved.
Awesome. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you. I'm going to go to Raina, and then Freddie, and Anne and Owen.
Okay, so we're really lucky in Wellesley in that we've had an integrated pest management program in place for a long time. So our employees are really in tune to it. So we have a landscape architect named Cricket Glass, who just for years has, while there's no policy like there is in Somerville to plant native plants in town, she has done an excellent job of planting the native trees and the native plants that we really are, so necessary, important. She always thought that. When I was first elected, I met with her and I was so excited to know that she was a fan of Doug Tallamy. And I was just like, okay, we're going to be great here. And a few years ago, the NRC actually brought Doug Tallamy to Wellesley to speak. And that was a big watershed moment. So many people, it was like a real aha. Another way to get things done in town, I don't know if any people work with their community preservation committees. There's lots of money for open space there. And they've been so good about funding projects that the NRC has brought forward. And a big one that we're doing now in town is a lawn conversion program. And we're going to do like a demo area. We're taking a big piece of grass and just, doing a step-by-step. I forget the people we are working with. We have consulted with someone who I'm sure their name would be familiar to you. And we're going to do step-by-step for residents so that they can see what's going on. We also took a big just swath of lawn this year and did no mow May, and we've left it. And it's just been a real curiosity in town, and people really like to walk by and talk about it and just see what's going on and count how many bees are out there. So that's another way. Another way to get things done in government is to partner with like our local sustainability or Sustainable Wellesley and our Wellesley Conservation Land Trust, and just do programs and things like that. But in Wellesley, when you run for an office, and it's an elected board, you come in with an agenda, and the agenda or the mission of the NRC is to provide stewardship, education, and advocacy for our parks, conservation, recreation, and open space, so the full value of the town's natural assets can be passed on to future generations. So that's a pretty broad purview. And when I ran, I was really interested in native plants and pollinators and preserving the land, and also in plastics reduction. And finally, my husband is a chemist, so I was interested in pesticide reduction. So I just took that mission and kind of ran with it. So that's just how elected officials do things. And then they create policies, and sometimes bylaws come out of those policies and they get voted on at town meeting. So it's important we try to have green town meeting members get elected. So we have a really nice chunk of, people that we know will vote a certain way at town meeting. So that's helpful too.
Great. Thank you, Raina. Freddie?
So I want to quote Vivian, follow up, follow up, follow up. Nothing happens without lots of follow up. And Southborough is a town meeting, not representative. Everyone gets to go and vote, and people will go and vote. There's a core group, but depending on what issues are at town meeting. And we have determined that we don't have enough support to pass any proactive green legislation. We don't believe. We don't want to go and lose. If it was, most bylaws or zoning require a 2/3 vote, that's a high bar to pass if you have anyone in opposition. And we have people who, for the Native Plant Initiative, believe it or not, there's some old time gardeners, landscape architects, landscape companies in town, members of our established gardening club that are in opposition to what we're trying to, they would vote against most of the bylaws we can think of. So what we have done is got to build your network. You have to build your support system. So we have worked really hard on that. Partnering with our library has been wonderful. We have presentations at the library. COVID shut those down. So, we started a winter sow program where we established these plants on our conservation land. We have collected the seeds from them. The town committee has. Because we can't have just everyone collecting seeds on conservation land. It's not an allowed use. But we've been able to collect the seeds. And last year was our 3rd year. This will be our 4th. We distributed over 12 or 1,500 packets of seeds to individuals. We open it up to anyone. We started I have a Native Plant Gardens of Southborough. It's not town government. It's a Facebook group. But it's where we get many of our volunteers. We also open that up to anyone. So it's not just Southborough. So what we do is we talk about only native to New England, no cultivars, native bees only, native pollinators. And that's where we're trying to spread the message and get people engaged more, which has been working. We've started through town government, the Open Space Commission. How do people know about this or change their attitudes towards landscaping? Public display gardens. So we have one on the conservation land, but we realize that's a research garden. It's not quite a display, but we realize it's also on conservation land. It's not where people are going to go to see what would look great in their yard. So we want to hit them when they're not expecting it. They're doing other things and they just see a garden, think that looks pretty, or we're in the perfect location. And we partnered with our library and we have a pollination preservation garden. That's what we call these gardens, using only the plants on Dr. Gigier's list for at-risk species of pollinators, only using those plants, and because they're often plants that aren't as available in nurseries, and to get people used to them. Last year, we worked with our DPW to not mow. There's a whole area around there to not blow the leaves. When they come out to blow the leaves, it's like sandblasting the soil. And I believe 70% of our native bees live in the ground, and even more insects. You're just wiping them all out. So they agreed to that. We're hoping to get more commitment to non-chemicals. We're not sure because it's the library grounds. We're following up with that. We have a section besides the garden that is a lawn alternative area. And a lot of these plants are plants we're learning about also. And we had one that we had great interest in, prunella, and it just doesn't work as a lawn alternative when you plant it all together. Interspersed with other plants. I mean, it was a learning lesson. So you know, we get to learn these lessons and share them with other people. We also have one on the local land trust, the Beals Preserve for the Southborough Open Land Trust we partnered with. In 2019, we worked with the DPW Conservation Commission Planning Board to update our street tree list, and we suggested that all the trees needed to be native straight species, native to New England straight species. And there was a little bit of pushback. We ended up with a list native to New England straight species, except for in a few cases, cultivars of native New England plants because of specifics, like we wanted to have elm be allowed. So we needed a cultivar of that so that we could have it, right? And some narrow columnar trees that weren't quite great for the straight species, but the majority of them are all native. We look to our zoning code. This is something anyone can do. You'll be surprised what you can find. 1980s, it was written, and there was a recommendation that, you know, in the permitting for site plan review, which is what commercial properties have. And Rosemary, should I talk about this now?
Yeah, hold that for a subsequent question.
Okay.
This is getting to the native plants on commercial properties, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about that later. Okay, so for the, we had great concern about mosquitoes control. We're part of the Central Mass Mosquito Control Project. We sign up, the town pays so much money, and then they just come, and anyone can call in for any reason and get their yard sprayed every 2 weeks. And, you know, you're supposed to close your windows if they're coming by, but nobody knows when they're coming by. So we started an outreach. We got our Conservation Commission working with them to list all their properties as no spray. Although registering your property as no spray is no guarantee they won't spray it. You also have to post it, and you have to post it on the night they're coming by. But the only way to know is to read what streets are being sprayed that week. So we have somebody who reports on that it's on Facebook, but you know, we know everyone's not on Facebook, but it's the best we can do. And we recommend that people leave the signs out. We worked with our local land trust. They registered all their properties, and they created you need to post your land every 50 feet, but each yard could get a sign, and we had someone design it with a child, a butterfly, and a dog playing in the yard. This yard is safe for all. So that's another area we worked in. We had a presentation at the library about that. And we're trying to, you know, just education and follow up. And there's a bunch more, but I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Freddie. Anne.
Yeah, Freddie and Vivian have touched on a lot of things that I would say are true here as well in Williamstown. You know, we are pretty rural, and you know, things are not terrible out here to begin with. There is not mosquito spraying. Our DPW uses no chemicals, not even lawn fertilizers. So that's kind of a non-issue. In my time on the select board, well, I would say, you know, how does something go from proposal to policy? We passed also a pollinator friendly resolution, and that was entirely driven by our Bee Friendly advocacy group. And then I could be at least a member of the select board who was giving it a little bit of extra air when it went to town meeting, but it then gets voted by town meeting voters. So the select board is not going to make or break a thing like that. It's really in the relationships that we built as a group, and then getting our message out there. I felt I'm also my last year in office, there was a lot of division and scandal in town that made it really difficult to be a public official. It had nothing to do with pollinators. And I've come away from that with a really strong sense that I much prefer building relationships, having one-on-one conversations. So in terms of, again, getting something from proposal to policy, I don't even know whether policy, like an ordinance, isn't necessarily something that I would be looking to make happen as a starting point. I mean, I would love to ban leaf blowers, for example, but I'm not going to, or glyphosate, but I'm not going to take on that huge political battle at a time where the glyphosate decision would impact a couple of barely surviving commercial dairies in our dairy properties, in our dairy farms in our town. Leaf blowing would probably, because we are home to a couple of large institutions, a college and an art museum that have obligations to maintain their properties in a sort of public facing way that sometimes means having a lot of lawn space where you could put a tent, or leaf clearing is something that's going to happen, but through the conversations we've been having, I've seen shifts. And I just spoke with someone at the college today who, because they volunteered their own little no-mow parcel all summer. I see them starting to shift. And I said, how come you're doing that? And they said, well, it's a combination of student advocacy, their own knowledge, like they're not idiots. They're learning about threats to pollinators and wildlife. So they're wanting to do something too, but he said it's important to us to be able to do it on our own terms. So yeah, just as my MO as a public persona was to just work on being friendly, being in dialogue with people, trying to understand where they're coming from as well, and looking for common ground. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Anne. Owen?
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree that a lot of things that have already been mentioned resonate significantly with what happens in Easthampton as well, whether no matter what form of town or city government you have. But just so, how could decisions be influenced with the positions you mentioned? So we have a 9-member city council, we have a strong mayor government. In terms of how we handle resolutions, those can be introduced to the agenda, can be passed to the first reading. If I wanted to introduce one tomorrow for our next meeting, it could theoretically be passed next week. In terms of binding legislation, we would talk about ordinance, and that typically just from the most boilerplate base level, that would go into our agenda. If I wanted to, for instance, introduce like a native plant ordinance like Somerville did, that would go to our agenda, be sent to a committee would discuss it, they would provide an opinion, then come to a public hearing. Obviously it's more complicated than that. There's a variety of roadblocks within city government, and there's a variety of other stakeholders and departments that are involved. In the case of a native plant policy, for instance, we have the planning department, we have DPW, we have Conservation Commission, Agricultural Commission, the parks, and then other just kind of political stakeholders that for a variety of reasons get freaked out about policies like this because it might cost money, it might take up resources in the form of city employees. And we're a small city of 16,000 people, I think one of the smallest cities in the Commonwealth. And when you start talking about setting aside land, for instance, for pollinator conservation, which is absolutely something we should be doing, you get people concerned when they're starting to think about development or how it might affect developers. So it really comes down, a lot of it comes down to follow up what was mentioned earlier, but conversation. I mean, in the process that we're in with Easthampton right now, it's just been a long series of conversations, not just about getting to the final goal that we want to get to, but how to get to that goal. I've probably rethought exactly how I want to achieve what I'd like to see happen in Easthampton a number of times, and this all comes down to getting the buy-in from all the departments I just listed, as well as recruiting local stakeholders, even if there's will on the council. Just looking at the question on your commission, So I mean, I think I kind of summarized that. I mean, the bottom line is, you know, we all have to work together. I mean, obviously, native plant policies and pollinator conservation and pesticide reduction and leaf blower reduction. Thank you for mentioning that. You know, that's all kind of common sense policy, but it's always amazing how Herculean of a task it seems. And I appreciate what someone, I think it was Freddie had mentioned, how it's crazy how when it comes to like a popular vote, for instance, how you'd be surprised how there wouldn't be broad support for kind of common sense, obvious policies that are saving our world and saving our pollinators. Yeah, I mean, so where we are right now is, again, tomorrow, even if I had support of the full council, we could pass some form of, we could certainly pass a resolution. We could potentially pass some form of binding policy, either something similar to what Somerville did, or I'm kind of moving slightly away from that. But you got to get everyone behind you, because even with a well-written policy and proposal, you could have, for instance, even the city planner show up and explain why, if we started to want to require native plantings for commercial developments, why that's bad for developers, even though it isn't. It's going to save them water and probably save them money in the long run, but we can get into that later. So, but that's our city government in a nutshell as it pertains to this topic.
Excellent. Thank you all for those very thorough answers. Very interesting information. I think that kind of segues very nicely into a question that I have about talking to other decision makers. Owen, you touched on this, and as did some other folks just now. But you know, in our CPR meetings in particular, our community pesticide reduction meetings, we talk a lot about, you know, negotiating with decision makers and identifying who they are. And very specifically, DPW comes up a lot for obvious reasons. And, you know, as folks mentioned, there are many places where something like an ordinance just really isn't politically viable. So I think, you know, my question is, if we want to implement changes like that, you know, but can't get something passed that sort of mandates that we do that kind of practice, how do you talk to those agencies? How do you negotiate with them? It could be, you know, specifically DPW, but maybe another similar agency in your town. How have you sort of worked with them and talked with them about these kinds of changes to try and persuade them? I guess I'll start with Anne. I don't know if you've done that, if you've talked to your DPW folks. It sounds like there are some lower barriers because of things they're already doing or not doing.
Yeah, so I can be brief, but yeah, I try to have stay in contact with them. Even now, just stay in touch. They tend to call. So, for example, there have been people who've adopted these sidewalk strips and planted them with pollinator, like fairly tall growing pollinator species, plants. And there's one area in particular where that was starting to get visibility complaints from motorists. So then the DPW will reach out to us knowing that we're in dialogue with these folks. So I try to maintain that relationship. It's an example of their concerns are always going to be, maintenance, visibility, safety, and those are valid concerns. So you have to be able to hear that as well. We are partnering really well with them on a large parcel of land that is parkland now. It was a former mobile home park that flooded out in Hurricane Irene and cannot be developed in any way as a result of it's a floodplain. And so that land is off limits for any kind of real development. And we've managed to educate our DPW about mowing practices. So they originally were mowing, sort of going through and just kind of hacking things down on a regular basis because that was what they thought was the right thing to do. And they now mow once a year they have let a couple of, they've introduced a rotational cycle. So there are sections they'll mow every other year, so that they're really letting portions of it stay for as long as possible. And yeah, all of that is a direct result of conversations with us and them having the capacity to learn and do something better if it's accessible to them. And that particular area doesn't have any of these visibility or safety issues. So yeah, I find them receptive as long as one is respectful and understanding of where, the concerns that they have to, they're there to keep the streets safe and keep them plowed and so on. If there were, and in terms of, we haven't sought out really, I mean, I asked them if they would do no mow May, and that was a flat no. I asked them if we could use a very, very public, large traffic island, a very, like a little mini public park right in the center of town for a demo lawn to meadow conversion, and a flat no. But we're actually doing a project like that at our school, at our elementary school, in a traffic island in a parking lot. So yeah, just looking for opportunities where they present themselves.
Excellent, thank you. And Owen, I'm just going to circle back to you because of the answer that you just gave. You were talking about, having lots of conversations with different stakeholders in town. What have your conversations with that department been like, and maybe some similar, folks or departments in town?
Yeah, so to speak specifically to the DPW, I mean, I guess pun intended, I've kind of planted the seed about trying to entertain, can we establish no-mow areas within the city? And I love this whole idea of kind of almost like a ecological experiment to have a very visible no-mow area. That's not something I've specifically thought about, more globally. I broached the topic with them recently. I mean, as was, I think, described, the first thing DPW always wants to think about is maintenance, and if you want to start establishing new green areas, who's going to maintain it and who's going to be responsible for it, and what happens when it's with the people who have committed to maintaining it stop maintaining it. So I've had the most limited discussions with them, but I do have to say that our DPW director, I think, is open to some of these ideas. But I think to infer from what Anne's said too, they've just been doing it in a certain way for so long that you almost have to kind of offer an alternative and why that alternative is viable. So the department I've probably interacted the most and who I bother on a regular basis is our planning department, because I think in terms of getting any sort of leverage with a broad initiative, especially if it might kind of wander into the area of a zone, something to do with the zoning ordinance potentially, that's going to involve our planning board, which is directly linked to our planning department. So I really have to court our city planner, the assistant planners, and the conservation agent, who are all housed within that department. And I mean, I think in their defense, they're trying to be practical about how this will all work. So it's just really about establishing relationships. And again, I mean, this is number one on my priority list, but as much as I think as people are sympathetic to preservation and conservation and to sustainable practices, it just, it might be more on higher priority on the planner's list to what's the next commercial development that's going to go in, how are we going to attract them, and how are we going to make sure that our zoning in town is going to sustain them. And so there's a lot of persistence that's involved, and just sending a lot of emails, trying to come up with objective data, I think is very important too. You know, saying that we want to do this. I mean, I think everyone gathered here knows why it's important to try to establish native plant policies and pollinator friendly policies, but I like to try to be really data driven and give them a reason why they can't say no. And also part of the process too, I think, is fielding the questions and coming back multiple times. You go to the planning department, they say, well, this is going to cost developers more if we start using native plants. So then you have to go through a process of reaching out to local nurseries who only sell native plants and say, well, is this true? And then you find out that it's not. So you go back to them, and then, you know, there's the questions of maintenance. Is this going to, are we get the water more if you use more pesticides? I mean, we know that's obviously an easy no, but you have to bring back the data saying, you know, generally native plants are use less water, they're drought resistant, they're generally because of their native origin, they're you know, that you don't need to use pesticides. But yeah, so to go back to your question though, it's a lot of relationship forming, and it's also a lot of the long game's important, unfortunately, because you have to convince people who, you know, again, to speak to the DPW, are just of a different mindset and don't understand as much as they might be sympathetic to these policies. You have to kind of wear them down over time and bring them all the information to kind of convince them. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. It did very well. Thank you. Thank you for describing that. I'm gonna hop over to Freddie. And Freddie, it's a little tangential, but you know, you've been successful in having commercial properties in Southborough actually plant native plants. And I was hoping that you could describe kind of how that came about, and you know, how you kind of worked with the different agencies involved to make that happen.
Sure. So I want to touch on what was just recently said by several people, but it's really about creating relationships, making friends, making friends, making friends. That goes with a follow-up, follow-up, follow-up. And we approach it, and when I say we, I'm talking about my Open Space Preservation Commission, because we have a role in town government. And we approach it as the carrot and the hammer. And in certain situations, we like to extend the carrot and we have to have a ground swelling of public support, or none of this is going to happen. And the hammer is when there's rules and regulations that say you shall or you must. In our zoning code, it means you shall or you must, which means you must when you start learning how to read code. But that's only as good as the members of the planning board requiring it. They may not know about it. This may be hidden in some language. And I will tell you, when I first got on the Open Space Preservation Commission, a lot of our time was spent battling the planning board. You know, we had a requirement for open space land set aside that was not being followed the way it was written. And that's when we learned that shall be did not mean if you feel like it. But then we were told the if you feel like it is like, if they don't do it, your recourse as a town commission is to, you know, go to court, which we'd never do. You never take another board to court, or at the ballot box. And that resonated with us. So you work hard, you're a citizen of your community, and you make sure that you support people running for office that share your views. So currently we have, back in those days, the chair of the Open Space Preservation Commission is now the chair of the planning board. And the next chair is, last year she was, this year she's still just a member, not just, but is a member of our select board. So those are permitting, decision-making boards and committees. I stayed on the Open Space Preservation Commission because somebody has to do the advocacy work, and that's what we're allowed to do. And but we now have our planning board, who is our, you know, I laugh, I was just telling the chair that who would have thought that they're the greatest relationship we have today. And, it's a wonderful thing. And this happens, some relationships come and go, but, we always work to have good relationships with all the boards and committees. So saying that, the carrot is when we have, and some of that is done with the Open Space Commission doing outreach and the Winter Sow program. We also participate in Heritage Day. It's a once a year event on a weekend coming up, and now called Indigenous People, and I think it's still Columbus Day in some places or whatever. And we got a booth and we gave away seeds and plants, and we decided to march in the parade, and we got a banner, and we had the kids dressed up as butterflies and bees, and people still remember that. And COVID shut that down, and we're thinking of coming back. So that's getting people interest in thinking this is a good thing. But we went through the zoning code and found the shell bees. And in the 80s, somehow the zoning code for site plans said they recommended that the landscaping be native. And that's a recommendation, right? But then in the early 2000s, we created a lower impact development bylaw that we put a shall be for the plantings shall be native. And especially when you have people who support your viewpoint, the planning board now adheres to that. And not every project, and these are commercial projects for site plan, right? Not every project requires a special permit for lower impact development. There's thresholds you have to meet. But for the recommended, I remember the time the developer was pushing back to a planning board member, and he was saying, this only says recommend. And she looked at him nicely and said, yes, and I'm recommending. And there was a bit of a tone there, because whenever a project requires, and almost all of them do, they'll ask for waivers. And a planning board has to, if you meet the requirement of the bylaw, you have to pass it, right? You can't say no. But if they're asking for a waiver, you can say, well, give me this or follow my recommendation. So, I mean, that's having the relationship. So I will tell you, is this talking about how we got them done, Rosemary?
Yes.
All right. So we read that early on. There was a project coming up. And when I say early on, this was like in 2019, I think. We asked the planning board if we could give a presentation in the middle of the hearing, because pictures are say more than words. And when the chair, who was part of the old planning board, told me, yes, you can, I knew we had crossed a threshold, because the day he let the Open Space Commission give a presentation in the middle of a hearing. And I happen to have made friends with Mark Richardson from Native Plant Trust. He got me his slide for Kill Your Lawns. We didn't call it that, but we were able to, use those descriptions of alternative landscaping methods and why it's important. And then the developer came, not the developer, the project proponent, and the planning board said all native straight species. And when they opened that door there, the next one, every single one since then has been. And we did one at a prestigious private school in town, and they're adding a new dorm. And they were like, oh, can't be done. That's what the first thing the landscape architects tell us. And well-meaning, but they don't know, right? Because they haven't done it. Can't be done. There's no place you can get the plants. And I'm like, well, actually, we've been working with nurseries, and in our area, Bigelow Nursery is I don't have stock, but I will say you have to have a nursery that can supply not the small little nursery, but large scale nursery. And they do DOT, DCR, all kinds of big projects. So when we started working with them early on, getting more native straight species. So I go, here's a company, there's another company, so we know there's companies. And then it goes, well, we need to make it fit in with our existing landscape, and the school's been around for a long time. And we're like, find something. You may have to, it's not short because we didn't allow cultivars. It's not short enough, you can trim it. I mean, you may have to change. We also don't allow mulch. That's because that just isn't good practice, right? It's not in the bylaw, but when you are doing this, if you're making conditions and they're getting waivers, these are the types of things you negotiate. So it was sort of a head battling, can't be done, can't be done. And this is every single time until more recently. And we were discussing one final plant. He wanted to get a cultivar or a species not native to New England. And we hadn't finalized it. We went back to the hearing. They said, we're done. So I was ready to go to that hearing thinking, okay, here we go. You know, the final hearing, they want to get their permit. They want to be held up by the planning board or the open space commission. And I'm figuring the gloves are off for this one. And he stood up, the landscape architect stood up and he goes, I'm here to tell you, this plan is 100% native straight species, not only native to New England, but native to New England. And I have to say, there was nothing negative about this, nothing negative. And I was like, you know, then the chair of the planning board thanked the open space commission. We thanked everyone. I said, someone should play the theme to the Love Boat. This did not start like this. There were dinners with the CFO, the landscape architect, the facilities manager. That's the follow-up. And it was a year later. And then the next thing that happens is after you get the permits and they happen, that maybe wasn't a year, but they take time, right? And you have to go to all the meetings, because if you're not there when the important vote is being taken, not there to stick up for, you know, other things come into play, and it doesn't sound that bad to not quite do what you had discussed, right? So you want to make sure, and not only that you discuss it, but it gets written into the permit. And then hopefully somebody will enforce that that happens. And we're very fortunate now. The first one we did, the first one that was permitted and is, you know, being built now, or is, well, they're looking for their occupancy permit. And our town planner went and looked and said, well, these aren't the plants that were on the plan. These are cultivars. And they have to take them all out and replant. And, you know, they're thinking it's close enough. And we have a planner who thinks, no, it's not. So I will say at St. Mark's, we got an additional to the landscaping they were doing. They added in like an acre of wildflower meadow. And we just did Ken's, their bottling facility. It's an industrial site, Ken's Foods. We got 30,000 square feet of wildflower meadow that is going to be plants chosen with the recommendation of the Open Space Commission and the town planner for the seed mix when they get there, utilizing plants on Dr. Robert G. Gere's list. We got 20,000 square feet of trees and shrubs, all from Dr. Robert G. Gere's list. We got maybe 3,000 square feet of lawn replaced with a lawn alternative to be determined with the Open Space Preservation Commission and the town planner to help guide them. I get phone calls, where can we get this plant? Even went so far as, you know, willows, male and female, how many, what the design layout is. So, and that didn't happen overnight. Follow up, but we're hoping once these start becoming more, you know, common, that it will be easier to do. And I'll tell you, we won't, when there's a network between developer community, and I'm sure the fact that Southborough's making a proponent replace all the cultivars is being talked about. And the next developer may not be as likely to do that, or, you know, use different plants. So I won't tell you how many 11 o'clock to midnight meetings I attended. It doesn't happen without investment. But we also had built the support network, right? We have friends on the planning board. We've worked well. One of the things you talk about is DPW. We continue to develop that relationship. She got a town grant for a street relocation. It's turned into a big controversy. Someone talked about town politics. It can go crazy and sideways. But she came to the Open Space Commission and said, we want to put in pollinator gardens on this new park we're putting in. Would you write a support letter? And we did, and it came back with pollinator gardens that was designed through the DPW, where when the plants came out, there were some cultivars or things we didn't quite like, and we were going back to, all our role was to make recommendations on the plants. And I don't want to say, watch my language. Everything went, it went crazy. And, you know, there was a big upset and people thought the land had, you know, indigenous burial grounds, and we had to have a state archaeological dig. And so it's all up in the air, but we're still working on that park to have, you know, besides lawn, which I believe parks and, there's a use for lawns within reason. And what we say is think scatter rugs, not wall-to-wall carpeting. Where do you, what do you need it for? And then the rest plant differently. And if you want a large green area, there's plants that can do that if you don't have to walk on it. But if you're having picnics or, playing Frisbee or, dog, whatever, there's some areas that need lawns. And I'll just say one other thing. We're not a fan of no mow May. And it's because we think you have your lawn area, and then what's not a required lawn area is better to be intentionally planted. Because what comes up in the no mow May is not really going to be as attractive or beneficial to pollinators. You can do better with an intentional area. The native strawberry, try keeping that in check. I'm sorry, we planted it in our lawn alternative and it took over the carrots. So, I'm just saying and we're also still learning, but I will say, just trying different things and then you'll learn, and then people will see it, and attraction is our key goal. Make this attractive to people. And I will say one final thing, we put in the pollinator garden at the library, and who knew there was a lot of controversy about that, and we don't like this, or what do you do, and we were trying to make it be a designed, attractive look. And we're still learning because we're only using plants on Dr. G. Gear's list. So we have a limited palette. We did have intentional design plan, but it did come up a little wilder than we thought. And we are moving some of the plants around, but people need to get used to that look, and we'll be changing it later. And I'm thinking, oh, it's looking too wild. And what funny thing happened is all I get now is compliments. And, kids, somebody took a picture of a child running through the little path. So, we still keep on working to make it a better design, but, we're very pleased with that. So I think that's it. If that's all you wanted from me on that topic.
Yeah, thank you, Freddie. Thank you very much. I'm going to, we have a couple sort of targeted questions. One is for Raina and the other is for Vivian. So I'm going to go to Raina first. Since we're talking about, DPW and sort of various other local agencies we might be working with, I wanted to ask you kind of specifically about things that happened in Wellesley. Wellesley is obviously a shining example in our state of a town that has actually transitioned to organic lawn care. that's the ideal. It's what we all would like to happen in our towns and cities. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that transition came about, and kind of who was involved in actually driving that effort.
Yeah, that's great. So I actually did a little remembrance research today. So I prepared a quick summary. I know time's of the essence here, but I'll just say that in the early 2000s, there was a group of citizens, and they were really concerned about a spike in cancer in Wellesley. And they believed that environmental factors were part of the reason. So they founded the Wellesley Cancer Prevention Project, and they lobbied the health department to create a town pesticide awareness coordinator, which was a volunteer role. So Wellesley resident Dr. Sarah Little was appointed, and she applied for a Turi grant of $7,000 to raise awareness in town about this issue. And she used letters to the editor, newspaper articles, spoke at all those meetings we all attend. They marched in the annual parade, sounded very similar to what Freddie's group did. The kids were dressed as butterflies and insects. And, just all the usual methods prior really to social media that were available at the time. So the appeal was to keep Wellesley's children safe and our pets safe. Children and pets are big draws always. And once there was some momentum in town, they approached the NRC about creating a no pesticide policy on the lands that the NRC managed, which are the conservation lands, which is easy to do, and about half the playing fields in town. And the other half of the playing fields belong to the school committee, and they have some state rules that they follow when they use their fields. So the NRC hired a consultant by the name of Chip Osborne of Osborne Organics, and he was the founder of the Organic Landscape Association. He was also a board member of the prestigious group Beyond Pesticides. And to give him some gravitas, he was also the chair of Marblehead's Parks and Recreation Department. And he advised the NRC on the policy, the IPM policy, and he also worked hand in hand with the DPW to create an organic turf management program for the playing fields. And he basically set out a really regimented program that they could follow. So it was pretty easy for that to happen for the DPW. And then in 2007, the Organic Integrated Pest Management Plan was voted into policy. And when I joined the commission in 2016, there was also a fellow commissioner who is now a select board chair. We like to seed things in Wellesley. Her name is Lisa Olney, and the two of us worked together with the other land holding boards in town, namely the library and the select board, to have them formally adopt the organic policy for their lands as well. So now all town-owned land in Wellesley is managed organically. The policy does allow for some waivers in certain situations, and those can get approved by the director, or if they could be controversial, the board would discuss them at a meeting. But those have been far and few between. So I'd say that our fields are as green as any other towns, and that the majority of parents and residents really appreciate not having to think about what's on the grass when their kids are being tackled or their dogs are out chasing a ball. But of course, this policy is for town-owned land only, as preemption laws in our state, as we know, prohibit municipalities from creating bylaws and ordinances regulating the use of pesticides. And the NRC regularly submits letters and testifies for pesticide reduction bills at the state level, including those mosquito spraying instances, and Dylan Fernandez's bill to give municipalities the right to regulate pesticides. And in 2017, I accompanied 3 6th grade students to testify at the State House, and they kind of stole the show. So anytime you can use children, I would suggest doing so. And while I firmly believe that education is a vital component in pesticide reduction, and the NRC spends a great deal of time on and resources on campaigns like a Healthy Yard toxin-free campaign, like we had this, everybody could put up little signs in their yard. Or last year we did a big Pollinate Wellesley campaign where we partnered with Sustainable Wellesley and the Wellesley Land Trust and brought in speakers on pollinators and pesticide reduction and how to care for our lands. We sold native plants, we provided reading lists. We had the police station put in a pollinator garden, and we've been trying to get the DPW to shift to electric landscaping equipment and leave the leaves, which they actually are pretty open to, and people are really enjoying the electric equipment because it's quieter and easier to use. I firmly believe that it's policies and laws that will really make the difference. And until we stop allowing these poisons to be sold at the local garden store and spread by homeowners and businesses like Mosquito Joe, that meaningful change will still be hard to affect, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying. And that's why I'm so glad to see that there are so many of you out there like us that are really trying to affect this meaningful change. So I thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Raina. It was really interesting history. I didn't know some of that, and yeah, thank you for sharing that. Fantastic. And I hope we can all achieve something like that, like what Wellesley has done. That would be fantastic. Vivian, I have a question for you. So you are the chair of the Agricultural Commission in Great Barrington. You've also been a driving force in developing and implementing a pollinator action plan there. And like many towns in Western Mass, Great Barrington is a right to farm community. And I imagine that there are a range of perspectives on pesticide use in your town. And so I was wondering how, sort of in your specific position, how you've approached working with that range of stakeholders who have kind of a variety of views.
Thank you, Rosemary. Good questions. I would summarize as education and collaboration, and I've enumerated 6 strategies, which I'll just go over quickly. And the first one is to try to have a consistent public voice. So we work things out in the Agricultural Commission, and if we have any others who are interested in the topic, we try to get them on board so that we're speaking with one voice, because there are many different ways that you can approach these issues, and we want to try to make the message clear and simple and show unity. And we also show appreciation for what pollinators do and their role in the food system, because we are a farming and gardening community. And so we connect it with something that most people find important, which is food. And that's something that we all take for granted, who are those of us who are pollinator advocates. But it's so obvious to us, but it's not obvious to everyone. And that message needs to be conveyed with appreciation, and also with a warning that we can't take these ecosystem services for granted, and that our pollinators are at risk, and that will put our farms, some of our farms and gardens at risk, not to speak of the entire larger ecosystem. The third strategy that I would emphasize, and I mentioned previously, is simplicity. And I like to call the KISS principle as keep it simple, sweetheart. There's a less favorable version of that, but here again, let's emphasize the positive. And when we, for example, when we presented the pollinator friendly community resolution at town meeting, one of the most outspoken people at town meeting on many issues is our largest farmer in town, who uses, mainly raises feed corn, and does the whole typical, commercial route of GMOs and herbicides. And we did not try to confront that. We focused on what we could do. And so we defined the resolution as encouraging awareness, education, and voluntary action by the town on town-owned lands, and that we weren't trying to tell private landowners what to do. We just wanted to set a positive example to show what could be done. And we didn't meet any opposition, to our surprise, because this person is normally very outspoken and quite oppositional in his style. So that's that I don't know if that would work for everyone, and it does limit you, but we are a right to farm community, so we're not going to change that. And so let's work where we can. And number 4 is let's make a business case, because for a lot of people, this is peripheral to them. But if you can connect it to the local economy, to the local well-being, and I love the idea of what Wellesley did in terms of connecting it to cancer. I mean, so many people have cancer among their friends and families. So here again, no one else is going to make that connection locally. So why not do that? Make the business case in terms of the economy and in terms of our health and well-being. We certainly did that, and we are in the process of doing that with the Board of Health, which took the initiative last year to initiate a moratorium on the use of glyphosate on town-owned and managed properties, which are hundreds and hundreds of acres. It's over 200 acres, so it's a significant amount of land. And we encourage them and work with them, and we also work with them on getting an exemption from the state with the mosquito mosquito control board spraying program. We wrote a letter. They had to get approval from the select board, so we wrote a letter for them to support that, and it passed the select board unanimously. And then that packet went to the state authorities, and we were one of a handful of communities that got exemptions this past year. It was really distressing to see how few communities qualified for exemptions. So here again, it was a question of educating the necessary officials who had to approve it, and work in the collaboration with another board that has the power to make decisions like that. Here again, we're only advisory. And then number 5 as a strategy is to get endorsements, recruit actual support statements from respected sources. If you can get someone to speak up at a meeting, that's wonderful. If not, at least speak to them beforehand and maybe get a quote from them, or ask them to write a letter to the editor, or post on local social media if they're involved with that, in support of what you're going to be bringing to a vote, either a town meeting or the select board or another board. And number 6 takes time, and I think certainly all the other speakers have shown how they've been doing this, and that is to create a track record that you're trustworthy, and that you're trying to do something positive for the community, and not trying to be dictatorial or force any particular policy on people, but how you can be seen as having a reputation of avoiding controversial quagmires whenever possible, and working to build these alliances, as others have talked about. And then that builds a track record and trust for your future actions. Some of the outreach that we did to do that included a presentation to the middle school students. We were invited to do that. We didn't seek that. We were also invited by the planning board to be involved and give a presentation on their formulating bylaws that would set requirements for solar installations on farms, and how that could be more pollinator friendly, kind of a precursor of what we've supported now on the state level with that program that requires these big commercial solar installations to get pollinator credits, and then reaching out to our state representatives. I mean, keep in mind that what you do locally, it resonates with the people who represent you at the state level, because it shows a community, a consensus. It shows that you have widespread support, and they need to be informed of that. They have so many things on their agenda, but it's up to you and others, both in the local government and your supporters in the community, to do that outreach. So I'll conclude there.
Awesome. Thank you, Vivian. I actually think that's a great note to end on. Very, very positive and inspiring us all to action. Thank you. It is just past 8:30, and we did plan for this meeting to end at about this time. If folks have questions for any of our panelists, perhaps you could let me know if you're okay with providing your contact information, or if maybe you want to drop it in the chat right now, if you're speedy. If that's the case, I can send out your email addresses to the folks who registered for this meeting. And if anyone has a question about anything that they heard today, you can feel free to reach out to our panelists or to me, and I'll put you in touch. I just want to thank all of you for sharing your stories and experiences. I learned a lot. I'm actually looking forward to going back and actually re-listening to this as well. So thank you for letting us record it, because I know there are also some folks who couldn't make it tonight, who really wanted to be here. So thank you all so much for your time. And I just wanted to say to everyone that, you know, I think what we heard here tonight was a lot of, it's a long game and there's a lot of organizing and building your group. And those are things that we focus on in the Community Pesticide Reduction Network meetings. And that's Mireille's like wheelhouse. That's what Slingshot does. So if you are working on a campaign, I encourage you to also reach out to Mireille about their services. Okay, so our next, I just want to end, you should always end by telling people when the next meeting is. We have two different groups here. So our next meeting for the CPR group will be on October 20th. And then our next MAPN meeting is on October 27th. And that meeting is going to feature some state officials who are going to be talking about what they're doing at the state level and these different agencies to try and improve pollinator habitat across the state. So I hope, yeah, it should be fun. I hope you all can make it. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I hope everyone has a really good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Rosemary.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.